The dust from the stagecoach hadn't even settled when Catherine Whitmore stumbled off its steps with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a small leather satchel containing her mother's Bible, the only possession her family hadn't burned, before casting her out into the unforgiving Texas heat of 1876. She stood in the middle of what the coach driver had called Redemption Creek, a town that looked like God had forgotten it existed somewhere between San Antonio and the Mexican border, and tried to remember how to breathe without crying. The September sun beat down mercilessly on her dark hair, and she could feel the stares of the townspeople like brands against her skin. A woman alone, without a husband or chaperone, was unusual enough. A woman who looked like she had been weeping for 3 days straight was a spectacle. Catherine pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the heat and looked around at her options. There was a general store, a saloon that seemed to be doing brisk business even at 2 in the afternoon, a small church with peeling white paint, and what appeared to be a boarding house with a crooked sign that read Mama Rosa's. She had $17 to her name, money she had hidden in the binding of the Bible because she had known, somewhere deep in her heart, that this day would come eventually. "You look lost, miss." The voice came from behind her, deep and steady with a hint of curiosity rather than judgment. Catherine turned and found herself looking up at a man who seemed to embody everything she had imagined about Texas. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that stretched his dusty work shirt. His face was tanned from years under the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. Those eyes were a startling shade of blue-green, like the shallow waters of a creek, and they were studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. He wore well-worn leather chaps over dark trousers, and a hat that had seen better days was pushed back on his head, revealing sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "I suppose I am lost," Catherine admitted, surprised at her own honesty. Perhaps it was because she had nothing left to lose, or perhaps it was because something about this stranger made her feel like honesty might actually be safe for once. "You just arrive on that stage." He gestured toward where the coach was already preparing to depart again, the driver checking the horses' harnesses with practiced efficiency. Yes, the driver said this was Redemption Creek. She glanced around again, trying not to let her disappointment show. She had asked to be taken to the smallest, most remote town the stage line serviced, somewhere her father's influence and her family's shame wouldn't follow her. It appeared she had succeeded. It is. Not much to look at, but the people are decent enough. He paused, then seemed to make a decision. "Name's James Thornton. I run a ranch about 5 miles outside town. My family owns most of the grazing land in these parts." Catherine Whitmore. She didn't extend her hand because she wasn't sure if that would be proper, and she was already so far beyond the bounds of propriety that she didn't want to make things worse. "You have people here, Miss Whitmore. Someone meeting you." There was no accusation in his voice, just genuine concern, and something about that kindness made Catherine's carefully constructed composure begin to crack. "No, no one is meeting me." Her voice remained steady, but she had to look away from those perceptive eyes. "I am on my own." James Thornton was quiet for a moment, and Catherine could feel him assessing the situation. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. A woman of 22 in a traveling dress that had once been fine but was now wrinkled and dusty. Dark circles under her brown eyes from nights spent crying instead of sleeping. Hands that trembled slightly when she wasn't consciously keeping them still. "The boarding house is decent," he said finally. "Mama Rosa is particular about her guests, but she's fair. Can you afford lodging?" "For a few days, perhaps." Catherine knew she would need to find work immediately, though she had no idea what kind of work a disgraced woman with no references and no skills beyond embroidery and piano might find in a town like this. "Come on then, I'll introduce you." Without waiting for her response, James picked up the small trunk that the driver had deposited in the dust and started walking toward Mama Rosa's. Catherine had no choice but to follow, clutching her satchel and trying to ignore the curious stares that followed their progress down the dirt road that served as Redemption Creek's main street. Mama Rosa turned out to be a formidable Mexican woman in her 50s with sharp, dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. She looked Catherine up and down when James made the introductions, then turned that penetrating gaze on him. "She running from something or to something?" Mama Rosa asked bluntly, speaking directly to James as if Catherine wasn't standing right there. "Does it matter?" James replied evenly. "She needs a room and she can pay. It matters if she brings trouble to my house." Mama Rosa crossed her arms over her ample bosom. "I run a respectable establishment. I assure you, I have no intention of bringing trouble anywhere," Catherine said, finding her voice. "I simply need a place to stay while I look for employment. I am willing to work hard and I can promise you I am of good character, regardless of what my circumstances might suggest." Mama Rosa's expression softened slightly. "You speak well. Educated?" "Yes, ma'am. My father was a banker in Charleston. I was educated at Miss Henderson's Academy for Young Ladies." Catherine saw no reason to hide her background. It would come out eventually anyway, and at least here, thousands of miles from South Carolina, perhaps the scandal wouldn't matter as much. Charleston is a long way from Texas. Mama Rosa's eyes narrowed. What brings a Charleston banker's daughter to Redemption Creek with no escort and barely any luggage? Catherine felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the weight of shame and anger and grief all tangled together. She had told herself she wouldn't cry anymore, that she was done shedding tears over people who had chosen their pride over their own daughter. But standing in this dusty boarding house, faced with this woman's direct question and James Thornton's steady presence beside her, she found the words spilling out before she could stop them. "My family disowned me." The words hung in the air like a confession, and perhaps that was what it was. Catherine's hands clenched around the handle of her satchel. "They cast me out with nothing and told me never to return, so I got on a train and then a stagecoach and I asked to be taken as far from Charleston as possible, and here I am." The silence that followed felt enormous. Catherine kept her eyes on the worn floorboards, unable to look at either Mama Rosa or James. She waited for the judgment, for the questions about what she had done to deserve such treatment. In Charleston, everyone had assumed the worst. A young, unmarried woman disowned by her family could only mean one thing in most people's minds, never mind that the truth was somehow both more innocent and more complicated than that. "Good." James's voice cut through the silence, firm and decisive. "Now you can start with mine." Catherine's head snapped up, confusion replacing the shame. "I beg your pardon," James was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something warm and determined. "I said now you can start with mine, my family, I mean. We're always looking for help at the ranch, and my mother has been after me for months to find someone who could help with the household accounts and correspondence. She never learned to read much beyond basic words, and keeping track of the ranch business has gotten too complicated for her to manage. You are offering me employment." Catherine's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "You do not even know me. You do not know what I did to be disowned." "Do not much care either," James said with a shrug. "I figure anyone who ends up in Redemption Creek is either running from something or looking for a fresh start. Sometimes both. What matters is what you do from here on out, not what happened before." Mama Rosa made a sound that might have been approval or amusement. "The Thornton Ranch is a good place," she told Catherine. "James here is the youngest of 3 brothers, and his mother Maria is a fine woman. If she's offering you work, you could do worse than to take it." "I am offering the work," James corrected with a slight smile. "My mother does not know about it yet, but she will agree once she meets Miss Whitmore. She has been complaining about the state of our paperwork for 2 seasons now." Catherine looked between them, trying to process this unexpected turn. She had expected to have to beg for work, to face suspicion and judgment at every turn. Instead, this stranger was offering her a lifeline without even asking for her story. It felt too good to be true, and she had learned the hard way that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. "Why would you help me?" she asked James directly. "You do not know anything about me except that my own family did not want me." "Most people would consider that reason enough to avoid me entirely." James met her eyes steadily. "My father came to Texas 30 years ago with nothing but a horse and the clothes on his back. People here gave him a chance when no one else would. He always said that, when you have been given a second chance, you have an obligation to give one to others. Besides," he added with a slight smile that softened his weathered features, "anyone brave enough or desperate enough to come all the way to Redemption Creek deserves at least a chance to prove themselves." "I am both," Catherine admitted, "brave and desperate in equal measure." "Then we should get along just fine." James turned to Mama Rosa. "Can Miss Whitmore stay here tonight? I will come by first thing tomorrow morning and take her out to the ranch to meet my mother. If it works out, we can arrange more permanent lodging." "She can stay," Mama Rosa agreed. $2 for the night, including supper and breakfast. Catherine carefully counted out the money from her small purse, watching her meager funds dwindle but knowing she had no choice. Mama Rosa took the coins and then, surprisingly, patted Catherine's hand with rough gentleness. "You will be all right, girl. You have the look of someone with steel in their spine. This country respects that." She turned and called out something in rapid Spanish, and a young girl appeared to show Catherine to her room. James touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was both polite and somehow intimate. "I will see you at dawn, Miss Whitmore. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." After he left, Catherine followed the young girl up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room with a single bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the dusty street. As soon as the door closed behind her, Catherine sank down onto the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened. 3 weeks ago, she had been living in her family's grand house in Charleston, preparing for the social season and trying to pretend that she was content with the life that had been mapped out for her. Then her brother Thomas had come home drunk one night and tried to force himself on one of the household maids, a sweet 16-year-old girl named Sarah who had been crying in the kitchen afterward. Catherine had found her there, had gotten the whole story out of her, and had immediately gone to her parents to demand that Thomas be held accountable. Instead, her father had called her hysterical, and her mother had said she was being dramatic. They had dismissed Sarah without a reference and forbidden Catherine from ever speaking of it again. But Catherine could not let it go. She had helped Sarah find a position with another family and had threatened to go to the authorities if her parents tried to interfere. That had been her fatal mistake. Her father, unable to tolerate what he called her betrayal and defiance, had given her an ultimatum: apologize to Thomas and forget about the maid or leave the family forever. Catherine, unable to stomach the idea of apologizing to her brother for his own violence, had chosen to leave. Her father had been as good as his word. Within a day, she had been stripped of everything but a few basic necessities and put on the first train heading west. Her mother had not even come to say goodbye. Her older sister had called her a fool who was throwing away everything for some servant girl who did not matter. Only her younger brother Matthew had cried and begged her to apologize, to stay, but even he had not offered to stand with her against their father's decree. Now here she was, in a town she had never heard of, dependent on the kindness of strangers. It should have been terrifying. Perhaps it was. But underneath the fear was something else, something that felt almost like relief. For the first time in her life, Catherine was free to make her own choices. There was no father dictating whom she could see or what she could say, no mother criticizing her every move. No expectations to maintain the family's reputation at the cost of her own conscience. She was starting over, completely and utterly. And if a cowboy named James Thornton wanted to give her a chance to prove herself, then she would take it and make the most of it. Catherine washed the dust from her face and hands using the basin on the washstand, then carefully unpacked her few belongings. Besides the Bible and the clothes she wore, she had two other dresses, one serviceable cotton day dress and one slightly nicer dress for church or special occasions. She had a hairbrush, some pins, a small sewing kit, and at the very bottom of the satchel, wrapped in a handkerchief, a silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother. It was the only piece of jewelry she had managed to keep, hidden away before her father could add it to the pile of things he had confiscated. She opened the locket and looked at the two tiny portraits inside. One showed her grandmother as a young woman, dark-haired and serious. The other showed her grandfather, stern-faced but with kind eyes. They had eloped against their family's wishes and had spent 50 years together before dying within months of each other. Catherine's grandmother had always told her that sometimes the right choice was not the easy one, and that a person's character was defined by what they were willing to sacrifice for their principles. "I hope I made you proud, grandmother," Catherine whispered to the portrait, then closed the locket and fastened it around her neck, tucking it beneath her collar where no one would see it. That night, she ate supper in Mama Rosa's dining room with the handful of other boarders, all men who worked in town or on nearby ranches. They were polite enough, tipping their hats and keeping their distance, and Catherine was grateful for the lack of questions. After the meal, she returned to her room and lay in bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of this frontier town. Dogs barking in the distance, the tinny sound of a piano from the saloon, voices raised in laughter or argument too far away to make out the words. She thought about James Thornton and his unexpected offer. He had to be in his late 20s, she guessed, old enough to have the weathered look of a man who worked outdoors but young enough to still have that easy confidence of someone who had not yet faced too many defeats. There had been no mockery in his eyes when she admitted to being disowned, no prurient curiosity about what scandal had driven her from her home, just acceptance and an offer of help. Catherine was not naive enough to think there were no risks in going to work at a remote ranch for a family she did not know, but she was also pragmatic enough to recognize that her options were severely limited. She could not afford to stay at Mama Rosa's for more than a few days. There was no other work in town that she could see, nothing suitable for a woman of her education and background. And James had mentioned his mother would be present, which suggested at least some degree of propriety would be maintained. Besides, there was something about the way James had looked at her, something steady and honest that made her want to trust him. It was probably foolish. Catherine had always been too quick to see the best in people, which was part of how she had ended up in this situation. But she was tired of being cynical, tired of second-guessing every interaction. If she was truly starting over, then she might as well start by choosing to trust. Morning came early. Catherine was awake before dawn, washing and dressing carefully in her better cotton dress, a deep blue that had always been flattering against her dark hair. She pinned her hair up in a simple but neat style and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked tired, but there was a determination in her eyes that had not been there before. Whatever happened today, she would face it head-on. James was waiting in the dining room when she came down, eating a breakfast of eggs and bacon while talking quietly with Mama Rosa. He stood when he saw Catherine, his manners clearly ingrained despite the rough surroundings. "Morning, Miss Whitmore, I hope you slept well." His eyes were warm in the early morning light streaming through the windows. "Well enough, thank you." Catherine accepted the plate of food that Mama Rosa thrust at her and sat down to eat. She was hungrier than she had realized, and the simple food tasted better than the elaborate meals she had once taken for granted. After breakfast, James led her outside to where two horses were tied to the post in front of the boarding house. One was a sturdy bay gelding that looked like it could work all day without complaint. The other was a smaller chestnut mare with a kind eye and a white blaze down her face. "Can you ride?" James asked, then seemed to reconsider. "I suppose they taught riding at that fancy academy of yours," They did, though I suspect their idea of riding and yours might be very different, Catherine admitted. I can manage well enough, but I am more accustomed to leisurely rides through parks than crossing open country. Rosie here will take care of you. James stroked the mare's neck with obvious affection. She is gentle and sure-footed. Just let her follow Dusty and you will be fine. He helped Catherine mount, his hands steady and impersonal as he adjusted the stirrups to fit her shorter legs. She could feel the strength in his grip, the easy competence of someone who had been working with horses his entire life. Once she was settled, he swung up onto his own horse with the kind of grace that came from long practice. They rode out of town as the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The landscape was different from anything Catherine had known in South Carolina. Instead of the lush green of the low country, this was open rangeland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear cactus. The air was dry and already warm, promising another hot day. In the distance, she could see low hills rising against the horizon. James kept the pace easy, occasionally pointing out landmarks or giving her tips on handling the horse. Catherine found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride, enjoying the novelty of it despite her nervousness about what awaited her at the ranch. "Tell me about your family," she said after they had been riding for about half an hour. "You mentioned you have brothers. 2 older brothers, yeah. Daniel is the eldest. He is 32, married with 3 kids. He and his wife Ruth run the eastern section of the ranch. Then there is Marcus, he is 29. He is married too to a woman named Alina. They have a baby daughter. I am the youngest at 26. And you are not married." The question slipped out before Catherine could think better of it, and she immediately felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. "Forgive me, that was inappropriate," James just laughed. "Not inappropriate at all, and no, I am not married. Came close once, about 3 years ago. Was engaged to a girl from San Antonio. But she decided she did not want to live on a ranch after all, wanted me to move to the city and take a job in her father's business. I could not do it. This land, this life, it is in my blood. We parted ways and she married a store clerk 6 months later." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a matter-of-fact acceptance. Catherine found herself liking him more for it. "And your parents?" she asked. James's expression grew more serious. "My father died 2 years ago. Heart gave out one day while he was mending fence. He was a good man, built this ranch from nothing. My mother has been running things since he passed, but it has been hard on her. She is strong, but she is getting older and the work wears on her. That is why I am hoping you can help with some of the bookkeeping and correspondence. Take some of that burden off her shoulders." "I will do my best," Catherine promised. "I may not know anything about ranching, but I am good with numbers and I write a clear hand. My father used to have me help with his household accounts before everything happened." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Catherine found herself studying James when she thought he was not looking. There was something inherently decent about him, something solid and trustworthy. He sat his horse like he was part of it, moving with an easy grace that suggested years of practice. His profile was strong, with a straight nose and a firm jawline, and when he turned to check on her, his smile was genuine and reached those blue-green eyes. Catherine realized with some surprise that she found him attractive. It was not the kind of polished, refined attractiveness of the gentleman she had known in Charleston, but something more fundamental. He looked like a man who knew who he was and was comfortable in his own skin, someone who had found his place in the world and was content with it. "There it is," James said, pointing ahead. "The Thornton Ranch." Catherine looked where he was indicating and saw a collection of buildings clustered in a shallow valley. There was a large main house built of wood and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around at least 2 sides. Beyond it were a barn, several smaller outbuildings, corrals with horses, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing on the open range. It was not grand in the way her family's Charleston home had been grand, but there was something welcoming about it, something that spoke of hard work and permanence. As they rode closer, Catherine could see more details. The main house was well maintained, with curtains in the windows and flowers growing in beds along the porch. A large dog came bounding out to greet them, barking enthusiastically until James called him to heel. A woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on an apron, and Catherine's first impression was of quiet strength. Maria Thornton was in her early 50s, with dark hair liberally streaked with gray pulled back in a practical bun. Her face was weathered by sun and wind, but her dark eyes were sharp and assessing. She was smaller than Catherine, barely over 5 feet, but there was something formidable about her bearing. She watched as James helped Catherine dismount, her expression giving nothing away. "Mama, this is Miss Catherine Whitmore," James said, leading Catherine forward. "Miss Whitmore, this is my mother, Maria Thornton." "It is a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Thornton," Catherine said, trying to keep her voice steady under that penetrating gaze. "My son tells me you are looking for work." Maria's accent was more pronounced than James's, with the musical lilt of Spanish underlying her words. "Says you are educated and good with numbers." "I am. I would be happy to demonstrate my skills if you would like." Catherine met Maria's eyes directly, refusing to look away first. She had learned long ago that showing weakness invited contempt. "Come inside. We will talk." Maria turned and walked back into the house, clearly expecting them to follow. The interior of the house was cooler than outside, with thick walls that kept out the worst of the heat. The main room was large and comfortable, with sturdy furniture and colorful woven rugs on the wooden floor. Catherine could see into a kitchen area where a large iron stove dominated one wall. Everything was scrupulously clean and well organized. Maria gestured for Catherine to sit at a large wooden table, then disappeared for a moment and returned with a stack of papers and ledgers. She set them down in front of Catherine with a thump. "This is 6 months of ranch accounts. Some of it I have managed to record, some of it is just receipts and notes. I need someone who can make sense of it, put it in order, and help me understand where we stand financially." "Can you do that?" Catherine pulled the papers toward her and began to sort through them. There were bills of sale for cattle, receipts for supplies, notes about hired hands and their wages, records of births and deaths in the herd. It was a jumbled mess, but Catherine could see the bones of a system underneath. She picked up a pencil that was lying on the table and began making notes, sorting the papers into categories and identifying what information was missing. After about 20 minutes of concentrated work, she looked up to find both Maria and James watching her. Maria's expression had softened slightly, and there might have been approval in her eyes. "I can organize this," Catherine said confidently. "It will take time, probably several days of solid work to get it all properly recorded and balanced. But yes, I can do this. I can also set up a better system going forward so it does not become such a tangle again. If you can spare the paper and ink, I can create proper ledgers for expenses, income, livestock records, and employee wages." Maria nodded slowly. "You have done this kind of work before." "My father was a banker. He insisted I learn proper bookkeeping, said it was important for a woman to be able to manage a household's finances. I helped him with his personal accounts for years." Catherine did not mention that her father had stopped allowing her to help after she had questioned some of his more questionable investments. That was in the past now. "I cannot pay much," Maria said bluntly. $20 a month plus room and board, you would have your own room in the house. You would eat with the family. Work is mostly the bookkeeping and correspondence, but I might also need help with other household tasks from time to time. This is a working ranch, not a fancy house with servants. I understand, and I am willing to help with whatever is needed. $20 a month was far less than Catherine had spent on dresses in Charleston, but here it represented security and independence. "I am not afraid of hard work, Mrs. Thornton. We will see." Maria stood up, clearly making a decision. "You can start today. James will show you to your room and help you get settled. We eat supper at 6 o'clock. Everyone sits down together, family and the hands who work closest to the house. It can be loud and rough, not like the fancy dinners you are probably used to. I am not looking for fancy, Mrs. Thornton. I am looking for honest. Catherine stood as well, meeting the older woman's eyes. I will not let you down. Something in Maria's expression shifted, warming slightly. We will see, she said again, but this time there was less skepticism in her tone. James, show her the room. Then you need to get back to work. Those fence posts will not set themselves. James led Catherine through the house, pointing out the kitchen, the parlor, a room that served as his mother's bedroom. Upstairs, there were 4 more bedrooms. He showed her to one at the end of the hall, a small but comfortable space with a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. This was my sister's room, James said quietly. She died when she was 12, about 14 years ago. Fever took her one winter. My mother kept it as it was for a long time, but a few years back she finally packed away Anna's things and made it a guest room. I am sorry for your loss, Catherine said softly. Losing a child must be unbearable. It was hard on all of us, but especially on Mama. Anna was her only daughter and they were close. I think that is part of why Mama is the way she is now. Tough, I mean. She learned that caring too much leaves you vulnerable. He looked at Catherine with an expression she could not quite read. But do not let that fool you. She has a good heart underneath all that armor, she just does not show it easily. I understand, and I am grateful for the chance, James, I truly am. Catherine set her satchel down on the bed and looked around the room that would be her new home. It was simple and plain, nothing like the elaborate bedroom she had grown up in, but it felt safe. That was enough. You will do fine here, James said with conviction. I can tell. You have got that look about you like you are ready to prove something. People like that tend to succeed. After he left, Catherine unpacked her few belongings and then stood at the window, looking out at the ranch. She could see James walking toward the barn, his long stride purposeful. Other men were moving around, going about their work. Horses grazed in the corral. In the distance, she could see a rider moving through the herd of cattle. This was her life now. No going back, no second chances if she failed here. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead, Catherine felt a strange sense of calm. She had been honest about who she was and what had happened, and these people had chosen to give her an opportunity anyway. That was more than her own blood family had done. She went back downstairs and found Maria in the kitchen, working on what appeared to be preparations for supper. What can I do to help? Catherine asked. Maria looked up, surprised. You are meant to rest, get settled. I am settled enough, and I prefer to be useful. Please let me help. Catherine moved closer, taking in the array of vegetables on the counter. I may not know much about ranch work, but I can chop vegetables and follow instructions. Maria studied her for a long moment, then handed her a knife and pointed to a pile of onions. These need to be chopped fine. You know how to use a knife? I do. Catherine rolled up her sleeves and set to work. It was not elegant work, and her eyes soon watered from the onions, but there was something satisfying about the simple, honest labor of it. They worked in silence for a while, and then Maria said, My son told me you were disowned by your family. Is that true? Catherine's hands stilled for just a moment before she resumed chopping. Yes, it is true. What did you do? There was no judgment in the question, just curiosity. Catherine decided to tell the truth. She was tired of hiding, tired of shame over something that should never have been shameful. My brother assaulted one of our servants. I tried to help her and hold him accountable. My family chose to protect him instead. When I refused to apologize and forget about it, my father disowned me. The kitchen was silent except for the sound of their knives against the cutting boards. Catherine waited for Maria's reaction, bracing herself for disbelief or accusation. Your family is full of fools, Maria said finally, her voice matter of fact. You did the right thing, the honorable thing. They should be proud of you, not casting you out. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes, the first genuine tears she had shed since leaving Charleston. Not tears of grief or shame, but tears of relief at finally being believed, being validated. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me for speaking the truth." Maria set down her knife and turned to face Catherine fully. "You will find that life is different here than what you knew in the East. We do not have the luxury of pretending that honor and reputation matter more than what is right. Out here, a person's word and their actions are all that count. You stood up for someone who could not stand up for themselves. That tells me what kind of person you are, and it is a good kind." Catherine wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a slight smudge of onion juice that made her eyes water even more. "I did not feel good when I was doing it. I felt terrified, but I could not just stand by and do nothing. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite the fear." Maria turned back to her work. "You will fit in here, I think, once you stop being so afraid that we will cast you out too." It was a perceptive observation, and Catherine realized it was true. Part of her was still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for these people to decide she was too much trouble or not worth the effort. But maybe, just maybe, she did not have to live in that fear anymore. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Catherine worked alongside Maria in the kitchen, learning how to prepare food for a large group of hungry ranch hands. It was different from the delicate cooking she had learned from her family's cook, more practical and substantial. But Maria was a patient teacher, explaining as she went and not criticizing when Catherine made mistakes. At 6 o'clock, the men began to arrive for supper. First came James, freshly washed and with his hair still damp. Then his two brothers, Daniel and Marcus, with their wives and children. Daniel's wife Ruth was a pleasant woman with a round face and a warm smile. She had 3 children ranging in age from 2 to 7, all of them energetic and loud. Marcus's wife, Elena, was younger, probably close to Catherine's age, with long black hair and delicate features. Their baby daughter was asleep in her arms. Several ranch hands also joined them, men whose names Catherine tried to remember as James introduced her. They were all polite, tipping their hats and welcoming her, though she could see curiosity in their eyes. A single woman arriving at the ranch was clearly unusual. Supper was a boisterous affair, with multiple conversations happening at once and children interrupting and laughter ringing out over some joke or story. Catherine sat between James and Ruth, trying to follow the various threads of conversation and not feel overwhelmed by how different this was from the formal, staid dinners of her childhood. "So you are from Charleston?" Ruth asked, passing Catherine a bowl of beans. "That must be so different from here. Do you miss it?" "I miss some things," Catherine said carefully. "The ocean, mainly. I grew up near the water and I always loved it. But no, I do not miss the life I had there. It was very constrained, very focused on appearances and propriety. This feels more real somehow." "Real is one word for it," Ruth said with a laugh. "Exhausting is another, but I would not trade it. There is something satisfying about building a life with your own hands, you know, making something out of this harsh land." Across the table, Catherine caught James watching her. When their eyes met, he smiled, and she felt something warm unfold in her chest. It was too soon to call it attraction, too presumptuous given that he was her employer's son and she was dependent on this family's goodwill. But there was something there, some connection that went beyond simple gratitude or politeness. After supper, the men returned to their evening chores while the women cleaned up. Catherine helped wash dishes, learning the rhythm of the household. Ruth's children played nearby, their energy seemingly inexhaustible despite the late hour. Baby Sophia woke up and began to fuss, and Elena asked Catherine if she would mind holding her while Elena helped with the dishes. Catherine took the baby carefully, remembering the few times she had held her sister's children before the disownment. Sophia was tiny and warm, with a fuzz of dark hair and eyes that stared up at Catherine with solemn intensity. She felt a pang of longing for the life she might have had, the children she might have raised if things had been different. But she pushed that aside. This was her life now, and she would make the most of it. Later that evening, after the work was done and the house had grown quiet, Catherine sat in her room and wrote in the small journal she had started keeping. She described the ranch, the family, the strange mix of fear and hope she felt. She wrote about James and the kindness in his eyes, though she was careful not to read too much into it. He had offered her work, nothing more. The fact that he was handsome and kind and made her feel safe was beside the point. But as she blew out the lamp and settled into bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, Catherine could not help but think about him. About the way he had looked at her when she confessed to being disowned, without judgment or pity. About his easy laugh and the confidence in his movements. About how, for the first time since leaving Charleston, she had felt like maybe things would be all right after all. The next weeks settled into a routine that Catherine found surprisingly comforting. She woke early, helped Maria with breakfast, and then spent most of the day working on the ranch's accounts. It was painstaking work, requiring her to track down missing information and make sense of months of haphazard record-keeping. But she found it satisfying, like solving a complex puzzle. Maria proved to be a demanding but fair employer. She expected Catherine to pull her weight, not just with the bookkeeping but with other household tasks as well. Catherine learned to bake bread, to preserve vegetables, to mend clothes that had been torn or worn. Her hands, once soft and pampered, developed calluses. Her arms grew stronger from hauling water and kneading dough, but it was the work with the accounts that truly engaged her mind. She created a complete system of ledgers, carefully recording every transaction and organizing the information in a way that made it easy to see the ranch's financial position at a glance. When she presented her work to Maria after 3 weeks, the older woman had studied the neat columns of figures for a long time before nodding in satisfaction. "This is good work, Catherine. Very good work." The use of her first name, rather than the formal Miss Whitmore, felt like an acceptance of sorts. "I can actually understand our finances now. I can see where we are spending too much and where we might invest more. I am glad I could help, and I have a few suggestions if you are interested." Catherine had been thinking about the ranch's operations as she worked through the numbers. "You are paying quite a lot for feed supplements. I think if you improved the grazing rotation and perhaps planted some additional forage crops, you could reduce that expense significantly. Also, you are selling most of your cattle at market weight, but I have been reading that there is a growing demand in the cities for premium beef. If you were to select some of your best stock and finish them on grain for a few extra months, you might be able to command a higher price." Maria had looked at her with something like amazement. "You learned all that from the account books, and from listening to the men talk at supper and asking questions when I did not understand something. I may not know ranching, but I understand business, and a ranch is a business, is it not?" "It is. A business I have been running on instinct and tradition, not on careful analysis." Maria had shaken her head slowly. "You have a good mind, Catherine. I am glad my son brought you here." So was Catherine, more than she had expected to be. The Thornton Ranch had become home in a way that her family's grand house in Charleston never had. Here, she was valued for what she could contribute, not for how well she could maintain appearances. Here, hard work was respected and honesty was expected. And then there was James. She saw him every day, of course. He ate breakfast and supper with the family, and he was often around the ranch yard working on various projects. But about a month after Catherine arrived, he started finding excuses to seek her out during the day. He would stop by where she was working on the accounts to ask a question or share some bit of news. He would offer to help her carry supplies from the barn. He would sit next to her at supper and draw her into conversation about books or music or her impressions of Texas. Catherine told herself not to read too much into it. James was friendly with everyone. That was just his nature. But she could not ignore the way her heart sped up when he walked into a room or the way she found herself looking for him during the day. And she could not ignore the way he looked at her sometimes, with an intensity that made her breath catch. One evening in late October, After supper had been cleared away and most of the family had dispersed to their various evening activities, James asked Catherine if she would like to take a walk. It was cooler now, the brutal heat of summer finally broken, and the evening air was pleasant. Catherine agreed, and they walked out toward the corrals, where horses were settling in for the night. "You have been here almost 2 months now," James said as they leaned against the fence and watched the horses. "How are you finding it? Really, I mean, not just the polite answer you give my mother." Catherine considered the question seriously. "I am finding it unexpectedly fulfilling. I did not expect to like this life so much. In Charleston, everything was about maintaining a certain image, fitting into a certain mold. Here I am just myself, and that seems to be enough. More than enough, actually." "You are more than enough," James said quietly. "My mother says you are the best thing that has happened to the ranch in years. Says your organizational systems and suggestions have already improved our efficiency. And beyond that, you fit in with the family. Ruth and Alina both like you. The children adore you. Even my crusty old brothers have admitted you are all right." Catherine laughed at that. "High praise indeed from Daniel and Marcus. It is, actually. They are very protective of the family. If they did not trust you, they would have said so." James turned to face her, leaning his hip against the fence. "I am glad I found you that day at the stagecoach. Glad I took a chance on you. No gladder than I am that you did." Catherine met his eyes, seeing warmth there and something more, something that made her pulse quicken. "You saved me, James. You gave me a future when I thought I had lost everything. You saved yourself. I just opened a door. You are the one who walked through it and made something of the opportunity." He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Catherine, I need to tell you something." Her heart was pounding now. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you." The words were simple, direct, achingly honest. "I have been falling since the day I met you, if I am being truthful. There is something about you, something strong and brave and beautiful. And I know the timing might not be right. I know you might not feel the same way, but I could not keep it to myself anymore. I needed you to know." Catherine felt like all the air had left her lungs. She stared at him, at this good, honest man who had given her a second chance and was now offering her something even more precious. "James, you do not have to say anything right now," he said quickly. "I am not asking you for an answer or a commitment. I just needed to be honest about how I feel. And I want you to know that whatever you decide, your place here is secure. My mother values you, and so does the family. This is your home now, regardless of what happens between us." "James, stop talking for a moment." Catherine reached up and placed her hand over his where it still rested against her cheek. "I am falling in love with you too. I have been trying not to, trying to convince myself it was just gratitude or relief at finding security. But it is more than that. You make me feel safe and valued and seen in a way I have never felt before. When I am with you, I am not the disgraced daughter or the woman who was cast out. I am just Catherine, and that is enough." The smile that spread across James's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. "You mean it. You truly feel the same." "I truly do." Catherine was smiling too, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Though I confess I am terrified. The last time I cared about something, I lost everything. I am afraid that this is too good to be true, that I will somehow ruin it or it will be taken away. I cannot promise you that nothing will ever go wrong or that we will not face challenges." James took both her hands in his, holding them firmly, "But I can promise you that I will not abandon you. I will not cast you aside when things get difficult. That is not who I am, and it is not how I love. When I commit to someone, it is forever." "Forever," Catherine repeated softly. "I like the sound of that, so do I." James leaned down and kissed her, gentle and sweet, a promise rather than a demand. Catherine kissed him back, feeling something broken inside her begin to heal. This was what love should feel like. Not the performative courtship she had experienced in Charleston, where everything was about making a good match and securing social position. This was real and honest, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. When they finally pulled apart, Catherine was laughing breathlessly. "Your mother is going to say I planned this from the beginning, that I came here specifically to trap one of her sons." "My mother is going to be thrilled," James corrected. "She has been dropping hints for 3 weeks now about what a good wife you would make. She will probably say she planned the whole thing herself." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Catherine felt like she was floating. How strange that being disowned and cast out had led her here to this place and this man. How strange that the worst thing that had ever happened to her had somehow resulted in the best thing. Maria was sitting on the porch when they returned, working on some mending by lamplight. She looked up as they approached, took in their linked hands and happy faces, and allowed herself a small smile. "About time," was all she said, but there was warmth in her voice. "I was beginning to think you would never figure it out, James. We are not exactly subtle, Mama." James dropped a kiss on his mother's cheek as they passed into the house. "But yes, I finally told her how I feel, and she feels the same. Of course she does. Anyone with eyes could see it." Maria set down her mending and looked at Catherine seriously. "You are sure about this, girl?" "My son is a good man, but he is not easy. He is stubborn and proud and so tied to this land that he will never leave it. If you marry him, this ranch becomes your entire life. No cities, no society, just hard work and whatever satisfaction you can find in it." "I am sure," Catherine said firmly. "I have had enough of cities and society. I want something real, something solid. I want this life, Maria, and I want your son. Then you have my blessing, both of you." Maria stood and embraced Catherine, the first truly warm gesture she had made since Catherine arrived. "Welcome to the family, daughter, because that is what you are now, whether there is a wedding or not." The engagement was short, partly because neither James nor Catherine saw any reason to wait, and partly because ranch life did not lend itself to elaborate planning. They were married in early December, in the small church in Redemption Creek, with Mama Rosa and half the town in attendance. Catherine wore her best dress, the one she had saved for special occasions, and Maria lent her a lace mantilla that had been passed down through her family for generations. James wore a new suit that he was clearly uncomfortable in, tugging at the collar and looking relieved when the ceremony was over and he could remove the jacket. Daniel and Marcus stood up as witnesses, both grinning at their younger brother's obvious happiness. Ruth and Alina had spent the previous day helping Catherine prepare, offering advice about married life that ranged from practical to hilarious. The ceremony itself was simple and beautiful. Catherine spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice, promising to love and honor this man who had given her a second chance at life. James's voice was rougher with emotion, but his words were no less sincere. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her with a thoroughness that made the congregation laugh and cheer. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and more food than Catherine had ever seen. The entire community seemed to have turned out, bringing dishes and gifts and good wishes. Catherine found herself passed from person to person, receiving hugs and congratulations from people she barely knew but who already considered her one of their own. Late in the evening, as the party was winding down and the stars were coming out overhead, James took Catherine's hand and led her away from the crowd. They walked out toward the corrals, to the spot where he had first told her he loved her. "Happy, Mrs. Thornton?" he asked, pulling her close against his side. "Happier than I ever thought I would be, Mr. Thornton." Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and horses and something uniquely James. "6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought being disowned meant I had lost everything, but I did not lose anything. I just finally found what I was supposed to have all along." "I know what you mean. I spent 3 years after my engagement ended convinced that I was meant to be alone, that I had missed my chance at love. Then you showed up, dusty and heartbroken and trying so hard to be brave, and I knew." He turned her in his arms so he could look into her face. I knew you were mine. I knew I was going to love you. I just had to wait for you to realize it too." "You did not have to wait long," Catherine said with a laugh. "I think I fell in love with you the day we met when you said now I could start with your family. You gave me hope when I had none left, James. You gave me a reason to keep going. You gave yourself those things. I just reminded you that you deserved them." He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise. "Come on, wife, let us go home." Their first months of marriage were a period of adjustment and discovery. James had given Catherine the choice of where they should live, offering to build them a separate house if she wanted privacy. But Catherine had chosen to stay in the main house, at least for now. She liked being close to Maria, liked the constant activity and noise of the family altogether. There would be time for their own place later, when and if they had children. The bedroom that had been Catherine's became theirs, and James moved his belongings up from his room on the first floor. It was strange at first, sharing such intimate space with another person, but Catherine found she liked having James near. He was patient with her nervousness, gentle in his courtship, and made her feel cherished in a way she had never experienced before. Catherine continued her work with the ranch accounts, and as the months passed, her suggestions began to show real results. The improved grazing rotation did indeed reduce feed costs. The decision to finish select cattle on grain paid off handsomely when they commanded premium prices at market. Daniel, who had been skeptical of her ideas at first, became one of her strongest advocates after seeing the numbers. "You have got a head for business, Catherine," he told her one evening at supper. "If you had been born a man, you could have run a bank or a trading company." "If she had been born a man, she would not be married to my brother, so I am glad she was not," Ruth interjected with a laugh. "Though I agree she has a talent for this. James, you married well." "Do not I know it," James said, reaching over to squeeze Catherine's hand. "I am reminded every day how lucky I am." As winter gave way to spring, Catherine began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited to be sure before saying anything, but when she continued to feel queasy in the mornings and her courses were 2 weeks late, she confided in Maria. The older woman's face lit up with joy. "A baby! Oh, Catherine, this is wonderful news. Does James know?" "Not yet. I wanted to be certain before I told him, but I think it is true, Maria. I think I am carrying his child." Catherine placed a hand over her still flat stomach, marveling at the idea of a new life growing inside her. "Tell him tonight. He will be over the moon." Maria hugged Catherine tightly. "My first grandchild from my youngest son. This is a blessing, Catherine, a true blessing." That evening, after supper was finished and they had retreated to their room, Catherine told James her suspicions. She watched as understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by pure, unfiltered joy. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with delight. "Catherine, this is incredible. This is the best news I have ever heard." "I am so glad you are happy," Catherine said when he finally set her down. "I was not sure how you would feel about it happening so soon." "Happy. I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic." James placed his hand gently over her stomach, his touch reverent. "Our child, Catherine. A new life that we created together. How could I be anything but thrilled?" The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and into summer. Catherine continued to work on the accounts, though Maria and Ruth both insisted she take more time to rest. She felt good, healthy, and strong, though the Texas heat in August was sometimes oppressive. James was endlessly solicitous, bringing her cool water and insisting she not overexert herself. In September, almost exactly a year after Catherine had arrived in Redemption Creek, she went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Maria and Ruth attended her, along with the midwife from town. James paced outside the bedroom, nearly wearing a groove in the floorboards with his worried walking. Finally, in the late afternoon, a baby's cry filled the air. Maria emerged from the bedroom with tears streaming down her face and a smile brighter than the sun. "You have a son, James." "A healthy, strong son, and Catherine is fine, tired but fine." Maria pulled her youngest child into a tight embrace. "You can go see them now." James burst into the room to find Catherine propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing with a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up as he entered, and the love in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "Meet your son," she said softly. "I thought we could name him William after my grandfather, William James Thornton. What do you think?" "I think it is perfect." James sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby in Catherine's arms. He was red-faced and tiny, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to stare up at James with solemn intensity. "Hello, William. I am your father. And I promise you, I am going to do everything in my power to make sure you never doubt that you are loved and wanted." Catherine felt tears well up at those words, understanding the promise James was making. Their son would grow up secure in his family's love, never cast out or made to feel that he had to earn his place. It was the greatest gift they could give him. The family gathered around to meet the new arrival, and William was passed from person to person, admired and cooed over by his aunts and uncles and grandmother. Daniel's children were fascinated by the new baby, asking a million questions about where he came from and when he would be big enough to play with them. As Catherine watched her son being welcomed into the family with such joy and love, she thought about the path that had brought her here. The pain of being disowned had been terrible, the worst thing she had ever experienced. But that pain had led her to this place, to this family, to James and the life they were building together. She would not wish away the suffering if it meant losing what she had found. That night, after everyone had left and it was just the three of them, James lay next to Catherine on the bed while William slept in the cradle that Daniel had made. James reached over and took Catherine's hand, linking their fingers together. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you and our son, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. I love you too, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." Catherine turned her head to look at him, at this good man who had seen her at her lowest and offered her hope. "Thank you for finding me, James. Thank you for giving me your family when mine rejected me. You are not just part of my family, Catherine. You are my family, you and William. That is everything that matters." He leaned over and kissed her softly. "We are going to build a good life together, I promise you that," and they did. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by hard work and simple pleasures. Catherine continued to manage the ranch's accounts, her organizational skills becoming legendary in the area. Other ranchers began to seek her advice, and she found herself consulting for several neighboring operations. The extra income was welcome, but more than that, Catherine loved the challenge of solving problems and finding efficiencies. 2 years after William was born, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Anna Maria, after James's sister and mother. She had her father's blue-green eyes and her mother's dark hair, and she wrapped the entire family around her tiny finger from the moment she arrived. William was a devoted big brother, solemnly helping to watch over his baby sister and reporting any time she seemed distressed. Maria thrived as a grandmother, mellowing in her old age but still sharp as ever. She taught Catherine the traditional recipes that had been passed down through her family, making sure that those traditions would continue. She told stories of the early days of the ranch, when it had been just her and James's father, and a dream of building something lasting. "You and James remind me of how we were," Maria told Catherine one day as they worked together in the kitchen. "So determined, so full of hope. Your father and I, we had nothing when we started, but we had each other and we had the land, and that was enough. You have that same strength, Catherine. You will build something good here." The ranch continued to prosper under the combined efforts of the 3 Thornton brothers and their wives. Daniel and Marcus both had more children, filling the ranch with the noise and chaos of young ones. Sunday dinners became epic affairs, with 3 generations gathered around tables that had to be pushed together to accommodate everyone. Catherine never heard from her family in Charleston again. For a while, she had wondered if her mother might reach out, or if Matthew might try to contact her. But as the years passed and no word came, she made peace with it. They had made their choice and she had made hers. She could not regret the path she had taken, not when it had led to such happiness. When William was 5 and Anna was 3, Catherine and James finally decided to build their own house on the ranch property. It was not far from the main house, close enough to walk but far enough to have privacy. James designed it with Catherine's input, making sure it had a proper office where she could work on the accounts and plenty of room for their growing family, because there was a growing family. Catherine discovered she was pregnant again, just as construction on the new house was beginning. This time she gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Matthew and Daniel after James's brothers. The household erupted into chaos with 4 children under the age of 6, but it was a joyful chaos, full of laughter and love. James proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful with his children. He taught William to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and he insisted that Anna learn as well, despite some grumbling from Daniel about girls not needing to know ranch work. James's response was that any child of his would know how to handle themselves on the land, regardless of gender, and that was the end of that discussion. Catherine watched her husband with their children and felt her heart swell with love. This was the man who had found her broken and lost, who had offered her his hand and his heart without hesitation. This was the man who had given her a family when hers had cast her out, who had made good on that promise spoken in the dust of Redemption Creek all those years ago. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James took Catherine back to the spot by the corrals where they had first confessed their love for each other. The children were being watched by Maria and Ruth, giving them a rare evening alone. The December air was crisp and cool, with stars blazing overhead in the clear Texas sky. 10 years, James mused, his arm around Catherine's shoulders. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like you have always been here. I know what you mean. I can barely remember what my life was like before I came here, before you. Catherine leaned into his warmth, content, and peaceful. Do you ever regret it, taking a chance on a stranger who showed up with nothing, not for a single moment? You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine. You and our children. You brought something to my life that I did not even know was missing. He turned her in his arms, his expression serious in the starlight. I mean that. You made me better, made this family better. The ranch is more successful, yes, but more than that, you brought a kind of grace and intelligence to everything you touch. You see possibilities where others see only problems. You never gave up, even when you had every reason to. I could not give up when I had so much to fight for, Catherine said softly. You gave me that, James. A reason to keep going, to build something new. You saw value in me when I could not see it in myself. I saw what was always there. You just needed someone to give you the space to let it shine. He kissed her then, slow and sweet and full of the promise of many more years to come. Here is to another 10 years, my love, and another 10 after that. To forever, Catherine agreed. To the family we built and the life we created from nothing. As they stood there under the stars, Catherine thought about that frightened, heartbroken woman who had stumbled off the stagecoach a decade ago. She thought about how that woman had been so afraid she would never find a place to belong, never find love or acceptance again. And she thought about how wrong those fears had been. Her birth family had disowned her, had cast her out and told her she was worthless. But James had said, "Good, now you can start with mine," and he had meant it. He had given her the Thornton family, and together they had built something even stronger. A love that was honest and real, children who were growing up secure in the knowledge that they were cherished, a home that was built on respect and hard work and genuine affection. Catherine had lost a family, but she had gained so much more. She had found herself, found her strength, found her purpose. And she had found a love that was worth more than all the approval and social standing in the world. The years continued to roll by, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of a growing family. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the cattle and spent hours poring over the account books with his mother, absorbing her lessons about business and planning. Anna was spirited and determined, refusing to be left behind when her brothers went riding and insisting on learning everything they learned. The twins, Matthew and Daniel, were as different as two boys could be despite being born minutes apart. Matthew was quiet and loved animals, always bringing home injured birds or orphaned rabbits to nurse back to health. Daniel was outgoing and energetic, constantly getting into scrapes and adventures that left his mother simultaneously exasperated and amused. When William turned 12, Catherine and James had one more child, another daughter they named Grace. She was a surprise, coming after Catherine had assumed they were done having children, but she was no less loved for being unexpected. Grace had her father's sunny temperament and her mother's quick mind, and she became the baby of the family that everyone doted on. Maria lived to see all her grandchildren grow, passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72 when Grace was 5. Her death was mourning by the entire family and much of the community, as she had touched so many lives over her years in Redemption Creek. Catherine grieved for the woman who had given her a chance when she had nothing, who had become more of a mother to her than her own mother had ever been. "She loved you, you know," James told Catherine as they stood by Maria's grave after the funeral. "She told me once that you were the daughter she had always prayed for after Anna died. She said you brought light back into her life. She gave me everything," Catherine said through her tears. "A home, a family, a purpose. I would not be who I am today without her. None of us would." As the children grew older, they each found their own paths. William, as expected, took to ranching like he had been born to it. By the time he was 18, he was running much of the day-to-day operations alongside his father and uncles. He married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread when he was 21, a sensible girl named Sarah who fit into the family as if she had always been there. Anna, true to her independent nature, announced at 16 that she wanted to become a teacher. She attended a teaching college in San Antonio and returned to Redemption Creek to open a school, determined to give the children of the area the kind of education she had received from her mother. James and Catherine were immensely proud of her, and the whole family pitched in to help build the schoolhouse. Matthew surprised everyone by showing a talent for veterinary medicine. He apprenticed with the town's animal doctor and eventually took over the practice, becoming known throughout the region for his skill with difficult cases. Daniel followed his uncle Daniel into the business side of ranching, showing the same head for numbers and planning that his mother had. Grace, the baby, turned out to be an artist. She filled notebooks with sketches of ranch life, capturing the beauty and harshness of the landscape in ways that took Catherine's breath away. When she was 15, one of her drawings caught the attention of a traveling art dealer who offered to help her get training in Dallas. It was a difficult decision, sending their youngest daughter away, but James and Catherine agreed that they would not hold her back from her dreams. Through it all, Catherine and James's love remained the foundation that held everything together. They had their disagreements, of course. James could be stubborn and Catherine could be too focused on work, forgetting to take time for herself. But they always came back to each other, to the commitment they had made all those years ago under the stars. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. All 5 of their children were there, along with William's wife and their 2 young sons. Daniel and Marcus and their families came, bringing the next generation of Thorntons to run the ranch. Mama Rosa, now ancient but still sharp as ever, made the trip from town. Catherine looked around at the gathering, at the faces of people she loved and who loved her in return, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was her family. Not the family she had been born into, but the one she had chosen and built through hard work and love and sheer determination not to give up. James found her standing alone for a moment, watching the party, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "I am thinking about how far we have come," Catherine said, leaning back against him. 25 years ago, I was a frightened, heartbroken woman with no idea what her future held, and now look at this. Look at what we built, James. 5 incredible children, a successful ranch, a family that spans generations. How did we get so lucky? "I do not think luck had much to do with it," James replied. "I think it was courage and love and a whole lot of hard work, mostly on your part." Catherine turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his face. He was 51 now, with gray threading through his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. But to her, he was as handsome as the day they met. More so, perhaps, because now she knew the depth of his character, the steadiness of his love. "It was all worth it," she said firmly. "Every struggle, every challenge, every moment of doubt, all of it was worth it to get here, to this moment, to this life with you." "I love you, Catherine Thornton. I have loved you from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, dusty and defiant, and trying so hard to be brave. And I will love you until the day I die and beyond." James kissed her softly, a kiss that held 25 years of partnership and passion and unshakable commitment. Around them, their children and grandchildren and the extended family continued to celebrate. But for that moment, it was just the two of them, just as it had been in the beginning. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over fear, who had built something beautiful from the ashes of Catherine's old life. Later that night, after the party had wound down and most of the family had departed to their own homes, Catherine and James sat on the porch of their house and watched the stars come out. It was a December night, much like their wedding night all those years ago, crisp and clear and full of possibility. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if your family had not disowned you?" James asked quietly. "If you had stayed in Charleston and married some society gentleman?" Catherine thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I mean I used to in the early days, but not anymore. If my family had not cast me out, I would never have come to Texas. I would never have met you, never had our children, never built this life. I would have been trapped in a gilded cage, pretending to be happy while dying inside bit by bit. Being disowned was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and it was also the best thing, because it set me free to become who I was always meant to be." "And who is that?" James asked with a smile. "Your wife, the mother of your children, a rancher's partner and a businesswoman in my own right, a woman who is not afraid to work hard and stand up for what is right. That is who I was meant to be, James, and I could never have become that person if I had stayed in Charleston." Catherine took his hand, linking their fingers together. "My birth family did not want me, but you did. You said, good, now you can start with mine, and you gave me everything I never knew I needed. So no, I do not wonder about what might have been. I am too busy being grateful for what is." James pulled her close and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to navigate together. But tonight they could simply be. Two people who had found love in the most unlikely of circumstances, who had built a family and a life from nothing but determination and hope. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as all years do. Catherine and James celebrated their 30th, then their 35th, then their 40th anniversaries. Their children all married and had children of their own, filling the ranch with yet another generation of Thorntons. The ranch continued to prosper, adapting to changing times while maintaining the core values that James's father had established so long ago. Catherine published a book on ranch management and accounting that became a standard reference for ranchers across Texas and beyond. She was invited to speak at agricultural colleges and conferences, sharing the systems and strategies she had developed over decades of work. It was strange and wonderful to be recognized for her expertise, to have her knowledge valued and sought after. But more than any professional success, Catherine treasured the life she had built with James. They grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the land they had worked and loved. They held hands at family gatherings and exchanged glances that communicated volumes without words. They supported each other through losses and celebrated each other's triumphs. When James was 65, he had a mild heart attack that scared them all. Catherine refused to leave his side, sleeping in a chair next to his hospital bed, and bullying the doctors into giving her complete information about his condition and prognosis. James recovered, but it was a reminder that their time was not infinite, that every day together was a gift to be treasured. "I am not ready to leave you yet," James told her when he was well enough to go home. "We have got too much living left to do." "Good." "Because I am not ready to let you go," Catherine replied fiercely. "We are going to grow old and crotchety together, James Thornton. We are going to sit on this porch and tell stories to our great-grandchildren and argue about whose memory is more reliable. We are going to have years and years yet." And they did. They had another decade together, years filled with love and laughter and the satisfaction of seeing their family continue to grow and thrive. They watched William take over as the primary manager of the ranch, running it with the same combination of tradition and innovation that his parents had exemplified. They attended Anna's wedding when she finally married at 42, finding love with a widower who appreciated her independence and intelligence. They celebrated as Matthew's veterinary practice expanded to include 2 younger vets, ensuring that the work he had started would continue. They saw Daniel elected to the state legislature, representing their district with honor and integrity. And they rejoiced when Grace's artwork was displayed in galleries in Dallas and Houston, bringing recognition to the daughter who had always seen the world differently. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family threw a celebration that seemed to include half the county. Catherine and James renewed their vows in the same church where they had been married, both of them gray-haired and weathered, but no less in love than they had been as young people. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren surrounded them, a testament to the life they had built together. 50 years, Catherine marveled as they danced together at the reception, moving slowly to account for James's heart and her arthritic knees. "Half a century with you, James. How did we get so lucky? Not luck, love, just love." James held her close, his arms still strong despite his age. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, Catherine, still the bravest, the smartest, the best. And you are still the man who gave me everything when I had nothing. Who saw value in me when no one else did, who loved me not despite my past but because of who I am." Catherine rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I would do it all again, James. Every moment, every struggle, every triumph. All of it exactly the same because it led me to you." They were 74 and 76 when James passed away peacefully in his sleep one spring night. Catherine woke to find him gone, his hand still holding hers even in death. The grief was overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her. For 52 years, he had been her partner, her love, her anchor. The thought of facing the world without him seemed impossible, but Catherine had never given up when things were impossible before, and she did not start now. She mourned him deeply, honestly, allowing herself to feel the full weight of her loss. But she also celebrated his life and their life together. At the funeral, she spoke about the man who had found a lost woman in Redemption Creek and had offered her his hand and his heart. She told the story of how he had said, "Good, now you can start with mine," when she confessed to being disowned, and how that simple statement had changed the course of her entire life. "James gave me a family when mine rejected me," Catherine told the packed church, her voice steady despite her tears. "He gave me love when I thought I would never be loved again. He gave me a purpose and a home and 52 years of partnership that I will treasure for the rest of my days. He was the best man I have ever known, and I was blessed beyond measure to be his wife." After James's death, Catherine lived for another 8 years. She remained active and engaged, still managing portions of the ranch's business and offering advice to William and the others. She wrote a second book, this one a memoir of her life, telling the story of how being disowned had led her to the greatest love and happiness she had ever known. It became a bestseller, inspiring countless readers with its message of resilience and the power of second chances. She spent time with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on the stories and values that had sustained her family for generations. She told them about their grandfather, about the ranch's history, about what it meant to be a Thornton. She emphasized that family was not just about blood, but about choice and commitment and love. "My birth family disowned me," she would tell them, "and your grandfather said, 'Good, now you can start with mine.' That became the foundation of everything we built together. We chose each other, chose this family, chose to create something built on love rather than obligation. That is the legacy I want you to carry forward. Choose love, choose courage, choose to see possibilities instead of limitations." Catherine passed away peacefully at the age of 82, surrounded by her children. Her last words were of James, saying that she could see him waiting for her and that it was time to go home. She was buried next to him on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a sky as wide and blue as his eyes had been. At her funeral, the church was even more packed than it had been for James's. People came from all over Texas to pay their respects to the woman who had transformed the Thornton Ranch, who had written books that changed how ranching was done, who had inspired a generation with her story of resilience and love. But more than her professional accomplishments, they came to honor a woman who had exemplified grace under pressure, who had chosen courage over fear, who had built a beautiful life from the ashes of rejection. William, now in his 60s himself and the patriarch of the Thornton family, gave the eulogy. He spoke about his mother's strength and wisdom, her unfailing love for her family, her determination to never give up no matter how difficult things became. But mostly, he spoke about her love story with his father. "My parents' marriage was a true partnership in every sense of the word," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "They supported each other, challenged each other, loved each other with a depth and constancy that was inspiring to witness. My father found my mother when she had been cast out by her own family, when she had every reason to give up hope. Instead of judging her, he offered her his hand and his heart. He said, 'Good, now you can start with mine,' and he gave her the Thornton family. Together, they built something beautiful. They built this ranch into what it is today. They raised 5 children who knew they were loved unconditionally. They created a legacy of hard work and integrity and love that will continue for generations to come." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "My mother used to say that being disowned was both the worst and the best thing that ever happened to her. The worst because of the pain and rejection, but the best because it led her here, to my father, to us, to the life she was meant to live. She said she would not change a single thing because it all led her to where she belonged. That is the lesson I take from her life. That sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our greatest trials. That family is not about blood, but about choice and commitment. That love, real love, can overcome anything if we are brave enough to fight for it." The Thornton Ranch continued to thrive under William's management and eventually passed to his children and his siblings' children. The systems and strategies that Catherine had developed became standard practice, taught to each new generation. Her books remained in print, continuing to influence ranchers and business people long after her death. But more than any professional legacy, Catherine's true gift was the family she had built with James. A family founded on love and acceptance, on the radical idea that you could create your own belonging rather than waiting for someone else to grant it to you. A family that understood that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you will fail, but that does not mean you are unworthy of love. It just means you need to find the people who will love you the way you deserve. The story of how James Thornton found Catherine Whitmore that day in Redemption Creek became a family legend, passed down through the generations. Children would ask to hear it again and again, marveling at how their great-great-grandmother had come from so far away with nothing and how their great-great-grandfather had given her everything. "Tell us about when she said her family disowned her," they would beg. "Tell us what great-great-grandpa said." And the storyteller, whoever it was that generation, would smile and recite the words that had become sacred in the Thornton family. "He said, 'Good, now you can start with mine,' and she did." She started with his family, and together they built a legacy that we all carry forward today. That is what it means to be a Thornton. Not the name you are born with, but the love you choose to build. That is what your great-great-grandparents taught us, and that is what we will pass on to you. The ranch remained in the family for over a century, a testament to the vision and hard work of Catherine and James, and the generations that followed. The original house still stood, carefully preserved, with the office where Catherine had worked on the accounts maintained as a kind of museum. Her ledgers were displayed in glass cases, her precise handwriting still legible after more than 100 years. Visitors could see the system she had developed, understand the mind that had transformed a struggling ranch into a thriving enterprise. But it was the personal items that drew the most interest. The Bible she had carried from Charleston, with the $17 hidden in its binding. The locket with her grandparents' portraits that she had kept until her death. The letters between her and James during the few times they were apart, full of love and longing and everyday details that painted a picture of their life together. And most treasured of all, Catherine's journals, where she had written about her journey from heartbroken exile to beloved matriarch, from a woman who thought she had lost everything to a woman who had found more than she ever dreamed possible. In one entry, written on their 50th wedding anniversary, Catherine had summed up what her life had become. The words were later inscribed on the marker at her grave, next to James's. "I was disowned and cast out, left with nothing but the clothes on my back and a Bible I could not bear to leave behind. I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." Because a cowboy with kind eyes and a generous heart said 5 words that changed everything. "Now you can start with mine." He gave me his family, and together we built a love that has sustained me through 50 years and will sustain me until I draw my last breath. I would do it all again, every painful moment, because it led me here, to him, to us, to home. That was Catherine's legacy, not just the business acumen or the books or the prosperous ranch, though those mattered. Her true legacy was the proof that love could heal the deepest wounds, that family could be chosen as well as born into, that courage and hope and determination could transform a life beyond recognition. She had been disowned, cast out, told she was worthless by the people who should have loved her most. But instead of letting that destroy her, she had used it as a foundation to build something beautiful. She had found a man who saw her value when she could not see it herself. Together, they had created a family built on love and respect and the radical notion that everyone deserved a second chance. And in the end, that was what mattered. Not where you came from or what had been done to you, but what you chose to do with the opportunities you were given. Catherine Whitmore had been given a chance by a cowboy named James Thornton, and she had seized it with both hands. She had built a life of meaning and purpose and deep, abiding love. She had proven that sometimes losing everything is the first step to finding what you were always meant to have. That was the story the Thornton family told, generation after generation. The story of a woman who was disowned and a man who offered her his family. The story of how good, "Now you can start with mine," became the foundation of a legacy that would endure for over a century. The story of how love and courage and second chances could transform not just one life, but the lives of everyone who came after. It was a story worth telling. A story worth remembering. A story that proved, beyond any doubt, that family was not about blood or obligation, but about choice and commitment, and the decision to love someone even when the rest of the world said you should not. Catherine and James had made that choice, every day for 52 years. And in doing so, they had built something that would outlast them both. Something beautiful and true and lasting, something called home.